Okay, here we are, taking another look at the PTS to really get a better handle on what's going on. And I want to add my criticisms and suggestions as well to the developers at PGI. I know they have been swamped by people providing their opinions and information, including some of the luminaries out there like, Fantastic Tuesday. So, here we go. So when we're talking about the interface, this is what comes up first. And there's a few things that are really nice about it. That it presents you your big categories up front and your subcategories down below. However, the interface itself is just one big thing, and it kind of jumps around from section to section. It's a little disconcerting. It would be better if the non-relevant sections were simply removed from view. That would I know that they've made it so you can scale in and out, but it's kind of a pain in the ass for navigation. And as far as UI design goes, I appreciate the idea that you'd want to look at it all. But that said, ease of navigation would dictate that if it's extraneous, let's get rid of it. So that's my suggestion. If you're in a given section, remove all the other non-relevant items. Now, right now, the current setup is so that you get 91 of these nodes, which by anybody's standard is way too high. Ridiculously high. What with mechs still retaining some amount of base quirks, I think that it would behoove them, of course, to reduce that. I know the idea is to create some sort of endgame grind, and I'm going to address that here shortly. But Fantastic Tuesday and other people have brought up the fact that whereas the goal was to promote diversity while still allowing people to develop their mech on a single chassis, the skill tree itself doesn't really work that way. And we really want to take a look at that. Let's look at SRMs, right? You can get all these cooldowns, spread reactions. This is what you would see if you were getting some of the SRM modules and things, and some of the quirks for SRM carriers. For like the Mad Dog with the Splat Dog, you're going to create a super monster for brawling. And there's a few other mechs out there that are really good at one or two things, and you're just going to really enhance that in them. But you're not going to provide for diversity. You are reinforcing the meta. And there's a couple of things that have been brought up. How do you allow players to make their choices meaningfully, to give them the option for variety, without forcing the three chassis aspect? And I've put some thought into it, and I might have a bit of a solution. So I'm going to start here with the pulse laser section, just in general, so you can see the particular branch of the tree here. In the initial skill system that we're used to, you're going to get something like 57,000 experience points to master a chassis. Most people are just going to get them all the way through Elite. They're going to do that 3 times for their 3 chassis, for that ×2 bonus. And so, with the removal of the need for 3 mechs, I can understand that they want to add the C-bill grind, and that's what the 100,000 C-bills is supposed to be. But that punishes people with multiple variants who want to get each of those variants up to something that's really usable so they can just switch out mechs. And what we want to do is encourage that too, because, you know, when we're selling mech packs, we don't want PGI to go down to just one particular variant of a mech. I don't want the Mad Cat Mark II, the A chassis only. I want all the variants when it comes out. So what we should be doing here with the trees is codifying it into tiers. And so you'll have between 3 and 4 tiers. All right. The first tier should essentially be, you know, the first 5 or so, or the first 2 levels of the upgrades on every item here. Whether it's operations, infotech, firepower, or survival, right? We're going to limit that to the first few. And all of these items are generally going to be must-haves, right? And we're going to allow people to choose pretty much most of the nodes. So with between 5 and 6 nodes per branch, we're going to say, okay, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can use up to 24 nodes in tier 1. And you don't get tier 2 until you've used all 24 nodes. Well, there's 30 nodes available, right? So you can be a little general. You can get a little extra. You can skip on a few things. And so you're still a fairly generalist mech. Now, that might require reorganizing some of these nodes, or even adding a few, or splitting them up a little bit. But the idea is that you're not going to force people to specialize just yet. And as a matter of fact, you're going to encourage it. Well, the next set of nodes, the next set of 5 or whatever, the next level for section 2, tier 2, you're only going to get a maximum of like 12 nodes. So now you have to think about specialization. You have to make hard decisions. And you have to look at tier 3 and tier 4 and think, if I want this, this is what I'm going to have to do. And so instead of these tiers being linear, they're going to branch out. More like this bad boy. Well, you know, if I'm going to take this track, I'm going to end up over here. If I'm going to take the center track, I'm going to end up over here. If I'm going to take this track, I'm going to end up over here. And even though you're going to have the same number of options, or even more options at tier 2, you're going to have fewer things to choose. And so you're going to have to make the decision, am I going to be highly mobile? Am I going to have to be, you know, more tanky? Am I going to be a sensor operator? Am I going to enhance a weapon? What trait am I going to choose to emphasize? Now that'll, now that's not too different from what you see here, but here's the caveat. The costs are going to increase between the tiers. So the first tier is going to have a very low C-bill cost. I'm thinking 10,000 C-bills, maybe 25 at the most, right? Tier 2, let's go up to 4 or 5 times that. So let's take it all the way up to 100,000, where it is right now, okay? Let's drop that down just a little bit. Let's say 75 is the cap, right? But if you buy another chassis and you complete tier 1 on that, you get a small reduction. So instead of saying 100,000, it'll go down to 75. Or from 75, it'll go down to 60. So if you buy 2 more chassis and they all make it through tier 1, you get a reduction permanently to the cost of advancing in the next set of tiers for any one of those mechs. That still encourages you to play Pokemech. And it doesn't punish you as monetarily. At least that's the idea. Now, tier 3 and tier 4 are the endgame content. They're going to be the higher end, more interesting things. Somebody pointed this out. Is it firepower? No, it's operations. All right. Magazine capacity. Holy shit. This should be over in the firepower section. There should be one of these specifically for each of the weapon types, right? As an end game tier 3 or tier 4 node. All right. And when you get to tier 3 and tier 4, you should be paying 500 grand per freaking node. And you only get 6 of those bastards, or some small number. The choice needs to be meaningful. It needs to be interesting. it needs to promote a little bit of diversity. When you get to tier 4 or tier 3 and people say, hey, what are you doing on that catapult? You should say, oh, I got this, this, and this, and then I got that. And they should go, oh, damn, I never thought of that. Right? We want it to be meaningful. And at the same time, let's make the respec costs a little lower. And that way it doesn't punish you, right? You still have the chassis diversity. It still encourages you to do different kinds of builds and different things because you get that deduction, right? So by the time you get to tier 4, instead of paying, 1.5 million or for that last each of those nodes, you're only going to pay $1 million if you've gone ahead and made it to tier 1 or tier 2 on the other chassis, right? That's where you provide the incentive is through the C-bills. By grinding here, you reduce the grind elsewhere, right? That gives the player choice. Now, you have to balance that. I'm going to leave that to PGI. But I think it's a good idea, right? It gives you multiple paths. You can stay with that one chassis. You can make it badass. But you're sacrificing opportunity to experiment. And one of the other things I might add is they ought to have a free node, right? When you use another one of the chassis, you should get a very small bonus to something, right? So if you pick a chassis that's a brawler by default, right? Because that's what it's really technically built for. So let's look at like the Atlas, right? You've got that, the DDC. It's an infotech mech, right? ECM. So if you grind that, and then you pick up yourself a 7S, right? That's a missile boat. You'll get a small +1 sensor range, +1% sensor range, or +2% sensor range to all your Atlases because you made it through tier 1. You'll get a small +1 or +2% missile velocity. The idea being that you get passive bonuses to all your chassis by exploring. Small side benefits. So that would encourage players to experiment not only within the skill tree, but within the mech chassis themselves. You give people meaningful choices, you spread things out, you don't limit them, but you reward them for getting out there and trying new things. That's the deal. You reward the player behavior. The tendency is to grind, right? You want to create a straight linear path, something that's easily done. And they've done that here. And I applaud them for that. But let's add these variables and make it interesting. Let's make it a real choice, where people aren't just sharing builds. They're sharing their skill trees. They're sharing their personal piloting decisions across their chassis. And I think that would make the new skill tree something truly special, something standoutish. And I have to thank Fantastic Tuesday for bringing up World of Warcraft and those kinds of things, right? I had thought about the tier idea, right? The scaled cost, right? So newbies aren't hurt. Veterans who don't use modules aren't hurt. And you still have something to grind for. But his concept, or his idea, was to look at other games where you make meaningful choices, like Mass Effect and the skill trees by the time you get to Mass Effect 3. You have to make choices about how your powers are going to work. Well, the same thing should be true here. We're going to start by giving you a lot of stuff. You're going to cover the basics, and you're going to have a little bit of freedom. But by the time you get to the end, you're going to be making hard decisions that are going to have radical improvements. And I think that would make the skill tree truly outstanding. So I do hope this was informative for Paul and the guys and whoever else is going to see this on the forum. I do hope it provides some insight into some thoughts from the community, my thoughts specifically. There are a few things I would say is that I would like to see more interconnectivity between certain paths, and then eventually when they diverge like this, I think that's freaking awesome. But it's also kind of a late stage thing where they diverge, and I think that's what's awesome, right? There should be interoperability in the beginning, and then you should start losing some of the connections as you go farther, so that once you choose a path, you have to stick with it. And that for certain items, they'll need to be moved around, and the community has ideas on that. But I do thank anybody who's watching this for taking the time to do so. You all are wonderful. Please leave a comment if you would. Share it, whatever. Throw it up on Reddit. Don't care. But again, have a lovely day. Thank you for watching, and happy hunting.